would like to welcome everyone to the fifth Domino Talk. A special welcome to our guest, the Domino duo, Shahzad Bashir from Brown University and Christian Wachter from Bielefeld University. As you know, the Domino Talk brings two scholars together, like two different domino pieces, and at the center of their exchange is a recent publication that focuses on theoretical questions to be discussed from two different points of view. This time, the author, Shahzad Bashir, presents his book, A New Vision for Islamic Pasts and Futures, which is a digital, interactive, open access publication published by MIT Press. In Christian Wachter's vocabulary is a hypertext. Christian, who presented this book, Geschichte Digital Schreiben, in the fourth Domino Talk, see the fourth piece, will give tonight a commentary to Shahzad's book. The domino mentioned value shared by Shahzad and Christian is a theoretical reflection on non-linear narrations and multiple times in historiography, and how digital tools can help to create in non-linear narrations and multiple times. Our author, Shahzad Bashir, is the Aga Khan Professor of Islamic Humanities and Professor of History and Religious Studies at Brown University. He is also Associate Editor of the journal History and Theory, our link. He grew up in Pakistan, and I say it because the question of positionality towards the book also is very important in this publication. But he studied at the Amherst College in the States and Yale University, where he obtained his PhD. His research is concerned, first of all, with temporality and messianic movements originating in Islamic contexts. And he dedicated to this topic his first book, published in 2003, Messianic Hopes and Mystical Visions, the Nubakshishia between medieval and modern Islam. Sorry for my Italian pronunciation. Another major topic is corporeality in Islamic contexts, to which he dedicated the book Sufi Bodies, Religion and Society in Medieval Islam, published in 2011. In his research plays a major role poetry as a source and a genre to access the Islamic past, as the book The Market in Poetry in the Persian Word shows, which came out in 2021. Now he's working on a new book he tentatively entitled Seeing from India, an Alternative Genealogy for Modern History. And this project correlates different sources and evidence, literary evidence, art, and built environment. Our expert tonight, Christian Wachter, is since 2022 a postdoctoral research associate in digital history at Bielefeld University. He studied history and philosophy at the University of Hamburg and the University of Göttingen, where he worked as a research assistant at the Center for Digital Humanities and then the Center for Theory of Culture and Society. At Göttingen University, he obtained a PhD in modern history in 2020. His last position before he came to Bielefeld was a postdoctoral research associate at the Chair of Theory and Methods of History in Göttingen. So his current project is an analysis of pro-democratic discourse in the Weimar Republic conducted through digital methods. Christian published several articles on this topic and more in general on digital humanities. And the most important publication is, of course, the book he presented at the fourth Domino Talk with Ethan Kleinberg, Geschichte Digital Schreiben, Hypertext als nonlineare Wissensrepräsentation in der Digital History, published by Transcript in 2021. And now, dear Shahzad, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for that very kind introduction, and thank you in advance to Christian for agreeing to comment on what I'm going to say and on the book. And it's really a great pleasure to be talking about this question in Bielefeld. There are really not that many other places that would be a better audience for talking about the question of theorizing narration in history than here. So I'm just going to give you a brief explanation for the book, and then we can go from there. So to the degree that you can see this, these are just some statements and also a kind of a graphic to talk about the fact that the book that we know, the standard book format that we know from the printing era, from the early modern period onwards, itself has a temporality. It goes from beginning to end. It forces a temporality onto what is being narrated within. Now, ordinarily, this temporality of the book coordinates together with the temporality that is perceived as being chronological. So a chronological history that follows a chronology dovetails very well with this kind of a notion of a book that is the representation of the chronology. So, for example, we can take a 1,000-year-long history. We can put it inside a book that can be read in a few hours. So there is a reduction of 1,000 years into the narration that is organized according to the pattern of time that is being followed in a chronological historical perspective. So there is a linearity of the book matches the linearity of the presumed kind of progression of history. Now, this is a standard way in which my older books were written as well. But the topic that I wanted to take up for the book that is now being represented, this was a big problem because I was interested in proving that actually history should be approached in a non-linear way. Now, so the question for me was that what I wanted to do was to think about Islam as a predicate of history. How do the word Islam and its usages in history coordinate together with the problems of history and historical narration? And my claim, my main argument was that Islam should not be represented in straight chronological fashion, and that the fact that it has been done that way is actually a problem that needs correction. So the form of the ordinary book then was a problem for me. So I was like, when I was writing this book in a regular way, I felt like I was representing the topic in a way that was arguing against the very point that I was trying to make. So when the digital possibility came up, it opened up trying to think a different way. So I decided to take that topic into a digital format, and so I'm just going to give you some views what comes of that. So what you're seeing on the screen here is a representation of a traditional form in which Islamic history has been told in modern context since the late 19th century. So what is happening here is you have different boxes that are on the sides are timescales that are presumed to be neutral. On the one side, it's the Christian calendar, on the other side, the Islamic calendar, but they're all flowing in a single direction. And then what you do is you take different time periods and different dynasties and different parts of the world and try to map them together into these boxes that are represented in the rectangular form that is here. Now, what this does is that the standard timelines on the two sides is actually forcing the immense diversity of ideas about history that are present in the material that is making this history available into these boxes. So anything that doesn't fit in these boxes has to be dropped out, and producing a very homogenized type of history that actually does not correspond to my reading to the original material. So how to then get out of this box? Now, what I want to argue is that Islamic history should look something like this when we represent it. So there's deep interconnectivity, as you can see here in this photograph of a web. But there's all kinds of entanglements. There are thick and thin lines all over the place. But there is a fundamental randomness to it. And the interconnectivity cannot actually be constrained into rectangular boxes. So I'm interested in thinking about these nodes that are presented in this web as different type of articulations of what the conjunction between Islam and history is from the inside out. So the idea for the book then was to think of Islamic history in this entangled, unending, fundamentally contingent web, and then to try to map out some small part of this web, which is what is in the book. Now, in order to do this, where the digital aspect becomes really, really significant and where it kind of dovetails together with the theoretical problems, is that the digital format allows doing some things that are fundamental to historical explanation, but allows us to do things that are not possible in print. So one of the major issues is that when we write history, the evidence that we present goes into the footnotes. There is a flattening of evidence. So I might be using 10 different languages, but they're all this. You can only tell that from the actual footnotes as to what those things are. So and then basically because I'm writing in English, all of that is flattened into English. So what the digital format does is that my narration is going to be in English, but the evidence can actually be presented in visual format. So for example, on the top you see a scene of Istanbul and a particular mosque that I talk about in the book. And my argument about this mosque is that it has multiple temporalities built into it and has been incorporated into multiple temporalities. And it's the same mosque that is being shown in 3 different images from different time periods. And the text explains this, but by being able to show it, what it means to understand this mosque in entirely different formats, it allows me to make an argument that is much more significant and much more tangible for the possible reader for me than if I were to just put this in footnotes or even to represent it in static photographs. Now, furthermore, all of the images that are there, they can be enlarged while one is using the image. So, for example, you see on the bottom now an image that comes from a medieval manuscript, and where you see the round circle, there's basically a kind of magnifying glass that you can take to little parts of the image. So again, this allows using images in a way that is not possible in print, even using photographs. And one can point to various things. And then when it's citing something textual, as you see in this case, one can actually present the text directly in a different language and its different format. This is a late 19th century journal that is published in Egypt, where I'm talking about it, but here I can actually present it as perfectly readable because of the magnifying function. So there is a ways in which it can allow us to think about evidence in a different way and helps me make the argument about deflattening the relationship between Islam and history. The second part is the question of context. Now, in the text context thing, and especially when we are using images, there's in the physical book, the text actually overrides the visual most often, and there's a way in which the text context relationship and its simultaneity is actually absorbed into the narrative that the historian is presenting. Now, what the digital allowed me to do is to have these 2 columns flowing all the time, in which case the idea that these are constructed is that the text is being contextualized by the image and the image is being contextualized by the text. So the simultaneity of the fact that text and context are always produced together, context is not prior to text, can be actually visualized and implemented in the digital form in a way it's not possible in the regular format. And also that one can change the text and context by producing various types of things. In this case, the visual is actually going to a video that has multiple texts inside of it. So you have multiple contextualizations possible in the same moment, and it's up to the reader to engage them in various ways. Similarly, what ends up happening in the book is at the end of every section, you can go to the next section according to the planned table of contents, or the book is actually inviting you to leave that narration and go to something else. So at the end, there is a possibility of choosing a different section that is related somehow to the one that you've already read, but it's the reader's choice to change the narration. And every time they choose a different section, the context within which what was just read was to be understood undergoes a change, right? So the fact that text and context are interdependent is performed through the digital formulation. Then finally, the question of narrative, which of course is the bread and butter of historical narration. So in this, what this allowed me to do is to actually, multiple narrations are made possible simultaneously. So what you see in the blue is a traditional table of contents where the chapters are listed with the sections in a certain order. If one wants to read it as a regular book, one can do that. What you see on the top is a constellation map in which the chapters have been distributed across, and it is showing lines going between the different chapters. Now in this case, one can pick visually, and every time you hover over one section, it shows all the possible other sections that could be associated with it, and not just the one that comes in the same chapter. So you have a visual narration possible through a completely different modality. And the third is that all the images, there are more than 300 visual elements in the book. They are represented in a separate gallery, so you can completely ignore the text and navigate the book only from the visual side as well. The multiplicity of indexicality is one of the big things that digital work provides for us, and I'm trying to use that to make the argument about Islamic history that I am implementing. What does this leave us with? So I showed you the image of the web, but this is an art piece that is done by a contemporary artist. So you have things that are organic, that are interconnected. You also have certain patterns that are regularized, but you also have a tremendous amount of irregularity all over the place. So my hope is that essentially people come to think of Islamic history and the Islam as a historical object in this kind of densely interconnected representation, but that is not predictable, not containable into kind of rectangular boxes, and actually allows one to kind of go into it and to rethink it from every little bit of evidence, elite as well as non-elite, to come to a different understanding of what the relationship between Islam and history is. So I will stop with that. That's what the book tries to do. Thank you.
So, before I start my discussion of Shahzad's book, I want to express my heartfelt thanks to Lisa for inviting me to the Domino Talk. I think it's great to take part in the wonderful format of the Domino Talk series, which put me in the same seat that Shahzad is now sitting in a couple of months ago. And now offers me the pleasure of commenting on his book. Reading the book was a delightful experience for several reasons. And I say reading in a broad sense because its interactivity demands a certain level of performance that goes beyond reading. But we come to that in an instant. So first, it was a pleasure from a theoretical perspective. Shahzad's approach of presenting Islam in a multivocal discursive way, as a multivocal discursive phenomenon forming around the cornerstone concept of time, is in my view incredibly compelling. While I'm not an expert in Islamic studies or history, I will focus on the way Islamic history is successfully portrayed as what Shahzad calls an entangled three-dimensional web. And second, Shahzad's book is groundbreaking in that it translates this theoretical approach into a meaningful format. And by meaningful, I mean that the book's design brings the argument about Islam to life through its own functionality and aesthetics. The design is not just appealing and modern in its appearance. Far beyond that, we wouldn't fully grasp the concept of Islamic history that Shahzad envisions without its interactive and nonlinear features. So this strong correlation between what I would paraphrase as concept design and media design resonates deeply with my own theoretical work on representing history through linkage and multimodality, which I had the opportunity to present here last time with reference to the concept of hypertext, as Lisa already mentioned. So I will discuss, I will structure my discussion of the book along these two axes of theorizing temporalities and the book's design. And in the beginning, I would like to emphasize that in the introduction of the book and in the two first chapters, Shahzad delves into his fundamental assumptions. Here he critiques the model of the timeline for grasping Islamic history, a concept stemming from Western and Orientalist perspectives. And this model suggests a clear sequence of causalities, which doesn't align with the diverse interpretations of those who have discursively shaped imaginations of Islam, and that includes discourses through architecture and any other symbolic forms as well, not only spoken and written language. So instead, Shahzad emphasizes a concept of time that draws upon two interdependent definitions. Firstly, time is understood as event, and secondly, by following Koselleck, as continuous variation in the material world. So the second notion emphasizes change. However, these categories aren't essentialized. Events and processes are imagined, selected, and placed into context. Against this backdrop, two central theses that Shahzad offers make sense to me. First, that he avoids the term present and instead talks about the horizon, where humans negotiate past and future. It is about the contingent standpoints that humans take to imagine the past and future, and I would like to add here, timelessness and eternity, which obviously plays a central role in many religious discourses. So Islam and its history are phenomena of imagination and perception. It's about positionality by Muslims and non-Muslims alike. And Shahzad demonstrates this idea across the chapters of his book, which each highlight different, I would say, paraphrase, modes of imagining time in Islam, and by discussing diverse examples for those modes. For instance, we learn about the rich architecture and symbolism of the Friday Mosque of Isfahan, and I just summarized that for the time's sake. Here we find a composition of inscriptions in stucco that combines different temporalities by correlating the Prophet Muhammad's and other authorities of early Islamic history with the time of the mosque's foundation, and on the one hand, and with the time of the visitor to the mosque on the other hand. Furthermore, the inscribed texts link internal paradise to the time of those who patronized and crafted the monument. There are more temporalities to be observed for this example, but the key point is that the inscriptions and their hierarchizing arrangement bridge or short-circuit different temporalities. And Shahzad discusses other modes of imagining time beyond the timeline, such as cases of cyclical recurrence of past times and anniversaries and rites. We also learn about genealogies through which rulers legitimize their power claims by referring to predecessors. We find instances of amalgamation of space and time, visible, for instance, with the great mosque of Demak in Java, Indonesia. It has to align to Mecca, this mosque, thus bridging a vast space which simultaneously testifies to the history of Islam in Indonesia. So in other chapters, Shahzad addresses human lifetime as a time unit and portrays historical fictions as realms of imagination about pasts and futures, just as real testimonies as religious architecture or canonized Islamic texts. I summarized just a selection of aspects that Shahzad covers, and he himself emphasizes that many more could be considered. However, these already illustrate the radical argument that Shahzad offers us, namely that we must envision Islamic history not as a timeline, but as he said, entangled three-dimensional web, and therefore the plural of pasts and futures. Shahzad links this to narration by referring to the web as a trope. And this idea encourages us to think beyond the context of Islam, about other multivocal historical themes where social and discursive construction plays a role and different temporalities converge. One could consider, for example, global perspectives in colonial power contexts or the history of national revolutions, where both the reference to political traditions and divestments from them play a role. We are also encouraged to think more broadly about pasts and futures and even contemporary discourse that refers to history and envisions, for instance, the future in history or in contemporary times. Something that Sultan Bolisha Simon and Marek Tim have called historical futures. So to quote both of the two authors, that means anticipated futures relate to apprehensions of the past. So that's what I'm trying to say here, is that Shahzad invites us to think about time constructions in a broader context, anchored in the imaginative and perceptual worlds of historical actors. But time constructs are also rooted in our perceptions as historians, since we too contribute to the web. And this leads me directly to the second part of my commentary on the book's format. Shahzad sees the entangled web of Islamic history reflected in the linked structure of the book. While it does have a chapter structure that we've seen, we are offered by the, what do you call it, the concept map?
The constellation.
The constellations map as the default device to access the book in the starting page, as you, if you like. So, and this allows readers to dive into various topics and find thematically related sections of other chapters at the end of each section. And these features traverse the preset order of the chapters. And the option to view image material in different orders by interactive selection also follows this direction. Shahzad writes, and I quote him here, these maneuvers allow my argument regarding time to be substantiated through readers' own experiences of the book. And thus, the book becomes a tool of meaning-making for the reader or user, as you like. And I might say that it works incredibly well as such. Shahzad's considerations closely resemble discussions in hypertext research. Ted Nelson, so he inaugurated the term hypertext in the 1960s, characterized hypertext as a non-sequential writing, a text that branches and allows choices to the reader, best read as at an interactive display. So, Nelson. Implementing multivocality has always been a major concern for that idea. Readers here too become active co-writers by choosing navigation paths. As another similarity, David Kolb emphasized that, I quote, if hypertexts are to serve inquiry, they need to question and comment on their own and others' form and relations, so they must be able to represent their own form and movement. Furthermore, Shahzad emphasizes that for his understanding of the web, he has in mind, and I quote, something like an image from nature that creates a complex jumble that we've seen here. In hypertext studies, this has often been referred to as a rhizome, another nature-based metaphor highlighting the endlessness and the endless possibilities of topics and perspectives for past and futures that also concern Shahzad. However, and now I come to my questions for the conversation, one has to clarify what exactly such an open web and interactive format is supposed to represent. Is it primarily the network of different perspectives on the subject, in this case the Islam, that is to be documented in an isomorphic manner? Or does Shahzad's own positionality and horizon form the web in which the diverse positions are integrated? When we include the reader's construction of meaning, and I said that the book is a device of meaning construction, a tool of meaning construction, we could speak of threefold constructivism. The construction or the constructivism by the voices in the examples, Shahzad's constructivism, and one by the readers. And to be sure, Shahzad emphasizes that his voice is only one among many that discursively constitute Islam. But if the book is to be a tool for the reader, the question arises about the balance between the reader's freedom to navigate and Shahzad's role as a guide through the web. And I'm not entirely sure how exactly Shahzad positions himself here. As a comparison, we can take Hans-Ulrich Gumbrecht's book on the year 1926. It provides an example of how everyday life topics for the focused year can be linked by readers in all sorts and directions. It's like jump reading through an encyclopedia. And here we have a complete network, which becomes only possible because Gumbrecht completely resides into the background and overturns control to the reader. But Shahzad seems to want something different, namely offering pathways through a network that principally exists as a kind of a background foil, I would say. So he offers specific short circuits between different parts of the book, but is that still a web in the full sense of the word? A second comment concerns, again, the concept of time and its representation in the book format. If time is about events and change, what does this mean for simultaneous phenomena? In his section on enduring forms, Shahzad presents to us the history of the minaret of Kudus in Indonesia. So the minaret's architecture borrows from pre-Islamic styles in an intertextual way, leading to a simultaneity of the non-simultaneous. Gleichzeitigkeit des Ungleichzeitigen. This example shows that simultaneity gets addressed. In parts, it also gets expressed by the book format, particularly through the links on the starting page, the network on the starting page, and the mapping of connection that interests Shahzad. And this is what I would like to show you. So this is the second device that maps concepts in Shahzad's book. So we have this mapping of different temporalities on a specific topic. And I wondered why Shahzad did not place this form of mapping more prominently in the book's design, if the design is supposed to represent the argument about the web of Islamic history. And the final question, short question, concerns the nominal approach, as he calls it, pursued by Shahzad. Understanding Islam as a multivocal web works for him because Islam is always imagined whenever it is mentioned in any form. I wonder if this criterion is categorical for Shahzad. In discourse theory, at least according to Foucault, but also beyond, indirect references or even silence on a topic are constitutive for discourses and thus for conceptions and perceptions of something as well. I'm interested in why such cases are less interesting for Shahzad, or whether the nominal approach is less strict than I have summarized here. So these are my comments and questions, at least a selection of questions, and I now look forward to the further discussion on Shahzad's exceptional book. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your very illuminating and generous reading. One of the things about writing a book is, of course, that it's only when it's out in the world that one realizes, oh, what did it do? Because there's no way to anticipate. And this is I've learned from everything that I've written, to never to presume what people will do with it. And especially when they do things with it from which one learns more things, as in Christian's commentary, that's especially welcome. When they don't get what one is trying to do, it can also be very frustrating, but that's a different situation. So thank you very much for the summarization of various parts. I mean, I basically agree with everything that you were saying, and also to see it correlated with aspects of hypertext theory makes a lot of sense, because this is something that I looked into when I was writing, and so it went into the construction of the form, etc. And to the degree that it comes across as being valid or kind of coordinated with that to someone like you who's researched that aspect of it is very affirming. Okay. Now, and both the questions that you ask are actually very significant, and they allow me to both think more and also to engage some of the things. So I will take the first one where you're absolutely right that in a way, in anything that I engage, there's the possibility of three different engagements with time that are present. So one is that I'm reading something that's time in the source, whatever the material may be. Second, I'm doing something with it, so that's my own kind of interpretation, which is not always, which is based upon the source, but it's not simply replicating it, but it's actually processing it and then doing something else. And then there is the reader's possible interpretation that is further there. Now, so so in a way, the mediating function is my horizon with respect to both the past, the source that I'm looking at, and the future that I can't foresee, but that I'm projecting with respect to putting this out in the world and seeing what happens. So in a way, for me, this was like the basis of writing the book, and this is why the present could not be made into something solid, because as I'm writing, I want my own voice to be seen as being completely contingent, right? So there is no standard present. There is a present from which I'm writing, but my presumption is that for any reader, that present is actually going to become the past, right? So the moment I write something and it's made into print or into the web, that already is a past. That is not the present in which I am living. So part of my hope was very much was to actually show the historian as adopting a present, fixing it for the purposes of narration, and then immediately actually that present becoming irrelevant because life moves on, and voice moves on, and so on, right? So now this is one of the things that this does for me is it puts the historian inside the web, right? So one of my arguments is that the way traditionally history of Islam has been written is to look at what historians, what Muslims are saying about Islam. So I insist that as a historical object, Islam is not made just by Muslims. It's made by Muslims and non-Muslims alike. If we look at the last 20 to 30 years, the biggest maker of Islam in the world is the United States government, based upon its actions in Iraq and Afghanistan and other places. Now, theologically, it could be dismissed. Theologians may say, well, what do American politicians know about Islam? Historically, we cannot dismiss that. And that has been the case throughout. All kinds of agents, human and states and others, have created this thing called Islam. And we have to treat them all equally as places and points from which various types of projections are made. And the historian, whether they identify as a Muslim or not, also make Islam constantly. And so in the narrative parts of it, what I try to be very careful about is that I use the first person pronoun I all the time. And that is very, very strategic, because that's both to recognize and to kind of to emphasize my positionality with respect to this, and also allow the reader to actually relativize that positionality. That is only one way of projecting about it, right? So underlying that is this fundamental question of how do we assert authority on the past as historians? If we don't do it, if I don't acknowledge my own positionality, then it feels like this is some kind of a historical narration in which the historian somehow is not a part of the history. It's an objective history, which I do not subscribe to. But if one constantly presents oneself, then it's just my own personal, individual, completely idiosyncratic, kind of narration. But I think that as the job as a historian, a responsible historian, is twofold: to actually acknowledge the positionality and to evocate it so that it never disappears, while at the same time being responsible for the material that is being cited and trying to be as faithful as one can be to the radical alterity even of that which one is dealing with. And I try to do that in the narrative form by, in a way, showing that these horizons of those who were past and my horizons and the possible horizons of the reader, they're all entangled. The one that I cannot tell is the reader's, right? So how someone reads this book as an academic in the United States or Germany is one thing. How someone sitting in, say, in the middle of a village in Indonesia will read it is entirely not known to me. And I want to actually completely retain that openness and that possibility of a radical interpretation into the future, and by people and contexts that I don't know, to be fundamentally alive. That is precisely that possibility of utter and complete relativization of my work is, I think, how I understand it history. That's what I am doing to the sources in the past, and other people can do it to me through this process. And the digital form allows this to be done more so, or more explicitly so, than the regular form, although that one could debate as well. Now, on the question of the nominal approach, so in a way, the investment in the nominal, I mean, there's two answers to that. One is that I'm taking nominal in a much broader way than one would understand it normally, right? So I say that when I define the nominal approach, it's like by name or implication. So it's actually trying to address, because the umbrella term is Islam, but then underneath that are all kinds of dozens of other terms that I'm utilizing based upon my understanding of why they would be associated with Islam. Now, selection of what is included or excluded, that obviously is my responsibility. So the investment in the nominal has to do less with, in a literal sense of nominal, and more so with that it has to be evoked, that we cannot presume from the outside what the meaning is without attending to the evidence that is being cited. So it's a kind of reframed nominalism that is coming especially from kind of reading the work of Ian Hacking and what he calls dynamic nominalism that he's using for the history of science that I've adopted for a different type of object, such as Islam. Now, so in many ways, both of the questions that you're raising, they eventually end up with the same thing, in the sense of how to accept the responsibility as a historian, and to actually engage with the details of the material, and actually stick very carefully to the rules of how historical argument is made. I'm not saying that anything goes anywhere. But that diversifying what counts as historical evidence, that is something that I'm doing. And there, the nominal approach allows me to engage many different types of materials. And then on top of that, by inscribing myself as one of these nodes, I'm opening it up to further reinterpretation. And the digital form, because it congeals and it allows for an uncongealing and a reorganization, is kind of mimicking what I'm imagining this. The actual web is much more radically contingent than what I produce, because this is obviously very carefully designed. But in a way, it's a device to show the conceptual problem, and then with the hope that in the actual world of experience, when this book is utilized, it would explode into the uncontrolled web that is the ultimate aim. So, thank you. We'll stop with that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for these insights. And it strikes me that it makes perfect sense to me that you have to find a way of balancing, of displaying the object of research as understood as a network, and on the other hand, show your own positionality inside the network, and on the other hand, provide a structured format that works by branching, but does not give control, total control to the reader on the other hand. And this has different dimensions, I would say. So we have discussed that from a conceptual and theoretical point of view right now, but certainly there are more practical constraints as well. So from a purely theoretical point of view, one could say, well, multivocality and also the perspective by the reader could be included by something like social reading devices. So there are many examples for that. For instance, the serious debates in digital history has this online publication format where you could highlight specific text parts and then give a comment on that, and then you have a contribution as a reader to the publication that is readable for other readers as well. So this is something that even opens up the web a little more. You could also say, well, these are aspects that you deal with in your chapters that are selective in a sense and could be augmented by different further examples as well. So the whole publication could be open and expanded in the future, something like a living book. But on the other hand, this is also a matter of how to place a publication that works for the market, right? So maybe you can give us a little more insight how to negotiate between these two perspectives of what you try to demonstrate conceptually and where you had to limit yourself in terms of producing something that works for the book market or the audience.
Yes, absolutely. And I think, I mean, in a way, what the difference that you were describing between something that would be open in that paper versus a book which is definitely constrained, is for the book market, that is the difference between a book and a website. And they don't want to publish websites explicitly, which are completely open. So there is a pragmatic constraint, certainly from the publication side of it. There's actually even more of a pragmatic constraint from the perspective of my own engagement. Because if it were open like this, it's what can be brought into it. I mean, just imagine Twitter.
Trolling.
Trolling, and like there's all kinds of possibilities of things being attached. So let's say I'm not necessarily concerned that I want to control it. But because it's a politically charged subject, it actually ends up with the possibility of creating a situation of discord and feeding into certain types of political possibilities that are in the world. And I don't want this to be used for those purposes in such a very directly connectable way. People can read it and use it in that way if they want. I have no control. But in a way, I wanted a constraint over this because of the nature of the subject. The other thing is that once it was done, I have said what I needed to say. I want to move on to other topics. I don't want to be responsible for this. In that way, it's very much like any other book, right? So I wanted it to have boundaries, and the only links outside of the book are to the videos because they are embedded in YouTube. Other than that, there are no links, and there's no desire to actually manage the links or to keep them updated, and because that requires a different type of attention and work. So for my mind, in digital space, it is like a regular book that is preserved in this way, with this internal linkages being the digital aspect that is most significant. And then after that, if the larger connectivity I can see, if someone reacts to it and creates their own book. Like, so for example, one of the peer reviewers suggested, well, what if you build in like vocal narration into it? And that's another aspect of history, and also just vocalization, particularly if the original text would do something other than representing them physically, etc. My reaction was fantastic. Someone else needs to do it. This was already so much work to do. But in that way, the hope would be that it actually acts like a kind of proof of concept, in which people can augment, change, object to, devise other types of tools, and so on, into looking into other possibilities. And technology changes, and there might be other things and that might be usable as well. So.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, this raises the whole question of what is manageable, because, for instance, the Wikipedia as well is highly prone for politicized influences, but on the other hand, they have a array of people managing quality. So this is something completely different, and has to be considered as well.
No, absolutely.
So if I may ask another question on the The last question, okay. About the spatial temporality that I have not commented on extensively, but which seems to be very important to you, leads to the question of how that is reflected in the format of the book. And I think it is very prominently reflected in the book by the map-like visualizations, and also the way how images are arranged and how you interact as a reader with the images. They are stacked, and you can bring the single image to the foreground and back to the background and grab another image and so on. So space is addressed as physical, geometrical space, but also conceptual space of spatializing concepts. When the distance between the mosque in Indonesia and the Holy Land is bridged ideally, I would say, right? I just wondered, and that was my second question, why is the space inside the articles of the chapter sections not so much reflected in the actual design? So because the single pages have the classical article structure with the column that you can interact with, but the concepts themselves are illustrated rather than performed by the devices of the book. Sorry, not the website. And that I thought maybe this is something that contradicts what you argue successfully for temporality, because temporality and the web really is performed by other parts of the book, but not so much the space.
That's a very good observation, and in a way, there's a kind of manageability and kind of practicality issue that came into it, because as we all know, space and time actually cannot be discussed without each other, right? So there is no time except talking about space. And so even in terms of just thinking theoretically about this project, before I did anything digital, I did make the determination that temporality would be foregrounded, because that is the theoretical issue that I am trying to work with, and the space question would actually be backgrounded. So, and when it became digital too, I think it's the temporal aspect of it, or temporal function of reading in a certain way, and the simultaneity with respect to being able to see two things at the same time and how to toggle between them. So the temporality actually became kind of the main kind of tropical kind of field within which to work. So I agree with you that I think space could be used as well. Either it could be made more forefront and then, or they could be used simultaneously, which would make it even more complex and stuff. But in a way, it was difficult for me to actually carry that in my head, to have both of them constantly in play. Where space does come in, so part of the argument also is to displace the notion from the idea that somehow the Middle East is central to Islam and other places are peripheral. Right? So part of the issue of using any kind of even a map and putting these things various places, I wanted to resist it, because then we are essentially taking a modern cartographic regime and then kind of reinforcing it, even while making the argument that it can be scrambled. So the way I try to do it to some degree is that every chapter in the traditional table of contents, every chapter begins in a different part of the world. The first on Iran, the second on Indonesia, the third in India, and that is kind of trying to gesture towards scrambling space in a similar way. But you're absolutely right. It's not fully kind of theorized and kind of reworked in the way time is, and that was kind of a choice that was made.
I'm just stressing this point because following David Staley, who says that text or spoken language as well has what he calls a one-dimensional syntax, whereas images have a two- or three-dimensional syntax, and therefore being more conducive to synthesis, simultaneous phenomena than to analysis. And in my view, this resonates very much with your approach. So from a theoretical point of view, I thought that would be something that, yeah, might be under exposed or under represented in the design.
Actually, I'm glad you're saying this, because I'm working on a small theoretical book on talking about the anamorphic quality of historical narration, using how anamorphism works in photography to make arguments similar to this. So hopefully this will actually, your comment is very valuable, it will feed into that. So thank you.
Looking forward.
Thank you very much.